The sky was coral and lavender when it happened, the kind of sunset that feels designed. Warm breeze, sea foam kissing the shore, chairs draped in cream linen. It was the kind of wedding that belonged in a magazine. And for a second, standing by the champagne bar, I almost let myself believe the beauty of it meant something. Then she appeared. Sienna. Her heels didn't sink into the sand. Too practiced for that. She moved like someone born into beachfront privilege, even if I knew she wasn't. Champagne in one hand, fake smile in the other. She leaned in, all glossed lips and quiet menace. "You can take one more glass if you like," she said sweetly, her voice low enough not to draw eyes. "But after today, we'd prefer if you disappeared." I blinked once. "I'm sorry?" She didn't repeat it, just set her glass down, fingers light on the rim. 50,000, she said. "That's the number. It'll cover what you think you're owed. You walk away after today. No more appearances. No more claims. No more interference." Interference. That's what she called raising a boy on my own, pouring every scrap of myself into him, sacrificing comfort and rest so he could one day live this exact life. One built on runways and beachfront vows. I looked past her shoulder and saw Ethan, my son, in a slate gray suit laughing with someone from his investor circle. He looked good, clean-cut, powerful, a stranger. Then he turned. Our eyes met. I waited. For confusion, for shame, for any flicker of, "Mom, I'm sorry." But he walked toward us, buttoning his jacket. "She told you?" he asked. Sienna smiled, stepping back like a well-trained opening act. "I told her," she said. Ethan didn't flinch. "You've done enough. You can always enjoy your retirement." Quietly. That was the moment I knew they were ready, and that they had no idea I was too. I reached for my clutch, opened it, pulled out my phone. One message. One phrase. "Sandcastle time. Sent." And then I smiled. The same way I used to when I packed Ethan's lunch and kissed his forehead before school. Calm, sure, ready. They had no clue the tide was already coming in, and everything they'd built was made of sand. Chicago was always gray in February. Not the dramatic kind of gray that looks good in photographs, just the ordinary, wet kind. Puddles that soaked your socks no matter how carefully you stepped. Wind that bit through 3 layers of fleece, and a sky that always looked like it was holding its breath. I remember the day I left Ethan's father like a photo that never fades. The metal gate squeaked behind me as I pulled it shut, one hand gripping the stroller handle, the other dragging a duffel bag so old the zipper was patched with duct tape. Ethan was 4. His cheeks were pink from the cold. His small fingers wrapped around the edge of a stuffed elephant I'd sewn back together more times than I could count. We didn't say goodbye to anyone. There was no note, no scene, just an unlocked door behind us and silence in front. He never hit me. Not in the way people understand, but control is quieter than fists. It's in the way you ask for grocery money and get told to eat less. The way your name is never on the lease. The way your child learns not to speak when his father enters the room. We lived like tenants in our own skin. The night before we left, I packed in the dark. One bag for Ethan, one for me. I didn't cry. Crying would have made it harder. I waited until he fell asleep, then slipped the envelope I'd been hiding under the radiator into the bottom of my purse. Cash, $320 total, saved from rounding down grocery receipts and lying about bus fare. At the shelter, they gave us a cot by the boiler room. It clanged at night, made the walls hum. but it was warm. Ethan slept against my side, his breathing soft. I stayed awake and stared at the ceiling, counting each pipe joint like a prayer. I promised myself 2 things that night. First, I would never go back, not even if he begged, not even if he changed, because men like him don't change, they recalculate. And second, I would make sure Ethan never had to ask a woman for his dignity. I started small. Bus rides, food stamps, a job at a diner where I cleaned tables and lied about having experience. I picked up extra shifts, then night shifts, then side gigs. I learned how to scrub blood out of cotton and remove wine from white tablecloths. My hands cracked in winter. My back ached. But Ethan ate. He grew, laughed, learned to read early and ask questions about everything. I said yes to every school fundraiser, every parent-teacher conference, every book fair, even when I was working on 3 hours of sleep and surviving on diner coffee and saltines. Somewhere between the second eviction and third promotion, I started saving. Not for me, for him. I called it the future account, but in truth, it was revenge. On every moment I'd been dismissed, erased, or told I was temporary. I wasn't. And neither was he. The diner on Halsted never closed. Neon buzzed against the windows like a heartbeat. The kind of place where truckers, students, and third-shift nurses all blurred together. I wore a name tag that said Maria, not because that was my name, but because it was the one they had on hand. I didn't argue. Arguing didn't get tips. I started with breakfast shifts. 5 a.m., clocks in, bleary eyes, the smell of burned coffee soaked into my sweater by noon. I learned fast. Kept orders straight, refilled mugs before anyone had to ask. Smiled just enough to seem warm without inviting trouble. After a week, they offered me evenings too. I said yes. Then added weekend doubles. And when the lights dimmed and the booths cleared, I walked 6 blocks to a janitorial job in a mid-rise office building. A different kind of silence there. Just the hum of machines left running overnight, the clatter of my bucket wheels echoing down empty halls. I cleaned conference rooms where people with degrees I couldn't afford had left behind their half-eaten lunches and crumpled outlines for presentations with titles like Scaling Sustainable Revenue. I read them sometimes curious, trying to piece together the shape of a world that had never made space for me. By the time I got home, Ethan would already be asleep, curled on the pull-out couch with a nightlight still glowing. I'd sit beside him, brush the hair from his forehead, and whisper stories I didn't have time to tell during the day. Stories about giants made of stone and boys who tamed them. About mothers who built bridges from paper and thread. On Sundays, when I could, I took him to the library. We stayed until closing, him devouring picture books, me copying job applications by hand to avoid the 15-cent per page printing fee. I'd circle postings that mentioned the words entry level or training provided and hope. Every paycheck, I split in thirds. One for rent, one for bills, one for the envelope tucked inside a dictionary on the top shelf. That envelope never got opened unless it was to add more. It wasn't just a savings account. It was a quiet promise. No one knew about it. Not my coworkers, not my sister who lived 2 states away. I didn't brag. I didn't dream out loud. I just folded bills one by one, counted them with slow fingers, and reminded myself that Ethan's future was not going to look like my past. When people told me I was strong, I nodded. But they didn't see what I saw. The nights I bled through my sneakers. The mornings my arms ached so badly I couldn't lift a coffee pot. The part of me that wanted to scream every time a customer snapped their fingers for more cream. But I didn't scream. I endured. Because survival wasn't strength. It was strategy. And I was building something they couldn't see yet. The acceptance letter came on a Thursday. A thick, cream-colored envelope tucked awkwardly into our rusted mailbox. I almost didn't open it right away. I thought it was a credit card offer. Ethan found it first. He ran up the stairs 2 at a time, waving it like a golden ticket. "It's from NYU," he said, breathless. I think I got in." We stood in the hallway, door half open, takeout bag still in my hands. My heart beat like I was the one waiting for news. He tore the seal carefully, unfolded the letter. Then he looked at me with eyes I hadn't seen since he was a boy. Wide, stunned, full of something too big for words. "I got in," he whispered. "Mom, I got in." We cried in the kitchen, surrounded by mismatched plates and unpaid bills. He read the letter aloud twice, then a third time, as if saying it enough would make it more real. I listened, nodding, my chest heavy with something that felt like joy and grief tangled together. NYU. Business school. A full ride for tuition, but housing, food, books, travel. That part was still ours to figure out. That night, after he fell asleep, I took down the envelope from the dictionary shelf. I spread every dollar across the table, counted it slow. The number wasn't big, not by most standards, but it was everything I'd managed to save in a decade of sacrifice. It was his shot, and I couldn't let the weight of our reality clip his wings. The next morning, I handed him a small box. Inside was a check for most of that money, folded between 2 old photographs, one of him in kindergarten holding a plastic trophy, and one of me at the diner smiling despite the grease on my sleeves. "I want you to use this," I said, "for your move. For whatever you need to get started. But there's one condition." He looked up. "Anything. When you build something with this, you don't do it alone. I'm not asking for credit. Just a seat at the table. Quiet, in the back, but there." His smile was soft. "You'll always have a seat, Mom." He kissed my cheek and held me like he understood. Maybe he did. Maybe. At that moment, the promise was real. I watched him board the bus to New York with 2 suitcases and a notebook full of sketches. He was full of ambition, ideas about men's fashion, streetwear with polish. He said he wanted to create something timeless. I believed him. Back home, I stared at the empty space where his bed used to be. The room was too quiet. The future had finally begun, and part of me had been spent to build it. But that's what mothers do. We hand over our bones and call it a bridge. And we pray they remember. It started with a pop-up booth in a Brooklyn flea market. Ethan sent me photos, racks of tailored blazers, soft lighting, minimalist signage that read Shaw Atelier. His last name. Simple, clean, aspirational. He looked proud in those photos, tired too. I could see it in the curve of his shoulders, the tightness around his jaw. Starting a business from nothing eats at a person. I knew that kind of fatigue. But he had Sienna now. She showed up in the updates more and more. Long legs, sleek ponytail, that curated sort of poise that looks effortless until you realize it never is. She smiled in every frame, one hand always touching Ethan, his shoulder, his wrist, the edge of his shirt. A claim without needing words. He called often in those early months. Asked about invoicing, contracts, the best way to price a bulk order. I walked him through spreadsheets like I was back at my consulting job. Sent him sample templates helped him file his LLC. I never asked for a title, never corrected him when he called me his advisor or early supporter in emails. I'd signed a silent partnership agreement with myself the day I gave him that check. It wasn't about credit. It was about connection. Then the suits took off. A celebrity posted a photo wearing one of Ethan's double-breasted jackets, tagged, shared, viral in hours. Suddenly they had interviews, meetings with investors, bulk inquiries from stylists and boutiques. The little table at the flea market turned into a studio lease with glass walls and stainless steel racks, their branding sharpened. Their tone changed. So did Ethan. He stopped calling for advice. Texts became brief. Responses delayed. Where once I was part of the scaffolding, I was now background. I watched interviews where he sat on glossy white couches and talked about starting from scratch, about bootstrapping his way to success. Not a word about Chicago, not a word about the fund that bought his first sewing machine, not a word about me. I didn't confront him. I didn't need to. I watched. I listened. I filed every omission like a page in a ledger. Not out of bitterness, but accuracy. Then came the articles. One headline called him a self-made sartorial visionary. Another dubbed him Brooklyn's breakout fashion disruptor. Each one painted a picture that erased the reality we'd survived together. I clipped them, saved them, printed them on high-quality paper, and filed them in a folder labeled Press. Because something inside me understood, before Ethan ever did, that image is fragile. And when it breaks, it shatters clean. The call stopped altogether by year 3. Birthdays turned into texts. Holidays turned into likes on social media. I sent a card when he announced the engagement. Sienna posted a photo of the ring with the caption, "Built this together." I said nothing, because silence in the right hands can be a tool. And I was done building things no one remembered. The first time I saw it, I thought maybe he misspoke. A podcast interview, small, local, nothing major. The host asked him how he started. Ethan laughed, light and polished. Honestly, just grit and a lot of late nights, no help. Just me, a dream, and a stack of unpaid invoices. I paused the audio, rewound it, listened again. No help. He said it like a badge of honor, like forgetting the truth made it more impressive. I didn't cry. I didn't even blink. I just opened the bottom drawer of my filing cabinet and added a new label. Narratives. It wasn't the lie that got me. It was the ease. The way he brushed over a decade of sacrifice like it had never existed. Like our life before Brooklyn had been erased with a few smooth syllables. I told myself it didn't matter, that I hadn't helped for recognition, that it wasn't about public acknowledgement or press quotes. But something twisted in my chest anyway. It got worse after that. He started showing up in business magazines, curated profiles with staged photos, him in a navy jacket, arms crossed, standing in front of racks of minimalist clothing. Every article told the same story. Young entrepreneur, built from nothing, pulled himself up by sheer force of will. Sometimes they'd mention Sienna, how she helped shape the brand's visual identity, managed influencer campaigns. They called her the strategic mind behind the aesthetics. She smiled in every shot, flawless and poised. I wasn't mentioned, not once. Even in the official company history on their website, the origin story started in Brooklyn. No Chicago, no single mother, no envelope hidden in a dictionary, just ambition, polished, sanitized, marketable. I went quiet. not just with him, with myself. I stopped looking at the company's updates, stopped replaying interviews. I let the silence settle like dust, but I didn't forget. I printed every article, screenshot every post, copied every instance where he claimed to have started from scratch. Each one went into the folder, a growing archive of omission. Because I knew something Ethan didn't. Truth has a weight. It sits in the corners of a life, unspoken but solid. And when pressure hits the wrong point, it all comes crashing down. He thought silence meant absence, but I was still there, just not where he expected. I didn't speak. I didn't text. But I remembered. Every check I wrote, every contract I reviewed, every hour I spent making his dream possible before it had a name. And I waited, not for revenge, not for an apology, but for the moment the silence would speak louder than anything they could post, because some debts aren't financial, and some erasures don't stay clean forever. She was waiting by the bar like she owned the sand. Sienna, champagne glass in one hand, phone in the other, scanning the crowd with a practiced sort of detachment, the kind that comes from always being sure someone is watching. Her dress was ivory silk, minimal but expensive. Everything about her was curated. Not one hair out of place. Not one movement wasted. I watched her for a few minutes before approaching. Watched the way she greeted guests, the careful tilt of her head, the soft grip on their arms as she leaned in. It wasn't charm. It was performance. A social currency she'd mastered. I'd seen that look before. On lawyers, on real estate brokers, on my ex-husband when he wanted something and didn't care who bled to get it. Sienna turned to me when I stepped up to the bar, smiled like we were old friends. "You found the champagne," she said, eyes scanning me from head to heel. I nodded. I did. She held her glass a little higher, like we were toasting something. "I hope you're enjoying yourself. It's such a special day." I didn't answer. I was too busy reading the edge beneath her words. The flicker behind her lashes. Then she lowered the glass. "We were wondering," she said, "about your future plans." I waited. Let her talk. I mean, Ethan and I are moving forward in a big way. The business, the expansion. There's just so much happening. She placed her glass on the bar gently. We want to make sure there aren't any complications. I tilted my head. Complications? She smiled again, but it didn't reach her eyes. 50,000. We can wire it to you. Think of it as a thank you for everything. And in return, you just let us handle things from here. Let us. I looked at her and saw exactly who she was. A climber, a strategist, someone who saw people as steps or shadows. I didn't hate her for it. I just didn't mistake her smile for kindness. Ethan joined us before I could speak, laid a hand on her back. His eyes darted between us, cautious but confident. "She told you?" he asked. "She did." He nodded. "It's not personal. We're just trying to streamline." I looked at my son, my only child, and saw a man I didn't recognize. Suited, polished, hollow. Every rough edge I'd protected him from had been sanded down by ambition, and the parts of me that built him were no longer visible. "You can enjoy your retirement," he said, quietly. That's when I smiled. The kind of smile Sienna would never earn. The kind that wasn't for performance or power, but for precision. Because they thought they were dismissing me. What they didn't know was that I'd never left the table. I'd just been waiting for the moment when silence could speak loudest. And it had arrived. There's something almost comical about arrogance. the way it forgets to read fine print, the way it underestimates the quiet people in the room, the ones who don't interrupt, the ones who simply file things away. Ethan never asked me to sign anything else after that first check. Not after the pop-up booth, not after the LLC registration, not when Sienna moved in with her vision boards and mock-up packaging. He was too busy trying to impress investors, too busy chasing legitimacy, so the terms never changed. I remained the majority stakeholder, silent, yes, but not irrelevant. The original capital investment, filed under a single partner operating agreement, named me as primary with 51% ownership. He never contested it, probably forgot, probably assumed he could outgrow it. But you can't outgrow contracts. You can only violate them. The week before the wedding, I met with Sarah, my attorney, someone I trusted because she understood restraint. She didn't ask why I wanted everything reviewed again. She just pulled up the documents, printed a copy, and walked me through every clause. Clause 6b. Breach of verbal or written ethical agreement initiates full rights transfer upon documented offense. Clause 9. Misrepresentation of company history in public disclosures permits legal recall of ownership privileges. Clause 12. Any attempt to silence or financially coerce the founding partner shall be considered hostile action. It was all there. I didn't need to rewrite the story. I just needed to let theirs unfold. Do you want to notify him now? Sarah asked. No, I said. Not yet? She nodded. Then we'll wait. Just say the word. I gave her the word 3 days later. On the wedding day, after the champagne, after the ultimatum, after Ethan told me to enjoy my retirement. I stepped behind a dune, pulled out my phone, and texted her 2 words, sandcastle time. She knew what it meant. Within 15 minutes, her firm triggered the protocol, account freezes, internal audit notifications, and legal alerts sent to the company's top 5 investors. A compliance flag was raised, and Sienna's access credentials were revoked from the shared financial platform. They wouldn't notice right away. That's the nature of silent moves. But the cracks had started. Back at the bar, I watched Sienna laughing with one of the stylists. Her phone buzzed in her clutch. She didn't check it at first. Then a second buzz. Then a third. She pulled it out, and I saw it. The first shift. The smile tightening. The brow twitching. Her fingers frozen on the screen. Across the patio, Ethan's best man said something that made him laugh. Another alert pinged on his smartwatch. He glanced down, paused, tapped the screen, still smiling, but now with confusion behind his eyes. I took a sip of champagne and let the salt air settle against my skin. They thought I was a footnote, but the foundation they built, it still belonged to me. And sand doesn't hold when the tide comes in. I didn't linger after I sent it. No triumphant walk across the sand. No dramatic stare into the ocean. I simply slipped my phone back into my clutch, stepped out from behind the dune, and returned to the reception. The music had picked up. A violin quartet eased into some slow indie cover that made everything feel like a curated memory. White tablecloths flapped gently in the breeze. Rows of flickering votive candles lit the tables where guests were being ushered into their seats for the dinner course. I took mine near the back. Alone. On purpose. 2 seats up, one of Ethan's investors leaned over to whisper something to another man in a navy suit. They both glanced down at their phones. Their faces didn't move much, but I saw it. That subtle shift, the pause before denial, turns into concern. Across the aisle, Sienna sat stiff, one hand pressed to her thigh under the table. Her phone lay face up next to her salad fork, screen going black between buzzes. She hadn't touched her champagne. Ethan was still at the head table, flanked by groomsmen and photographers. The fake laughter had stopped. He was reading something now. A long message, head tilted slightly, the vein in his temple beginning to throb. I watched them, calm as the tide. Because silence is loud when you're paying attention. The protocol Sarah initiated wasn't noisy. It didn't come with sirens or lawsuits yet. It came with flags. Account activity halted mid-transfer, system audits queued into the back end, investor notifications outlining temporary freezes due to potential ethics violations. Standard, procedural, but effective. They had built an empire on image, sleek branding, curated authenticity, stories polished to the point of fiction. But they had done it on a legal structure they never cared to revisit, a structure I still controlled, and once the right threads were pulled, things unraveled fast. I knew the order, first confusion, then the frantic attempts to log in, the failed authentication resets, the alerts pinging across investor dashboards. The sinking realization that the money wasn't moving anymore. Sienna stood up first, walked briskly toward the catering tent, her phone clutched tightly in one hand. She didn't even excuse herself from the table. That told me everything. Ethan followed 5 minutes later. Less, frantic, more composed. But I could see it. The weight in his shoulders, the way he loosened his tie slightly as if that would buy him air. They were both trying to figure it out, trying to get ahead of something they didn't even see coming. And me? I stayed seated, calm, hands folded in my lap. No one was looking at me. Not yet. But the truth had been set in motion. And it wasn't waiting for a toast. It was already in their inboxes, flagged red. Sandcastle time had begun. By the time the entrees were served, the air had shifted. Not drastically, not yet. But enough for anyone watching closely to feel it. Laughter dimmed to murmurs. The photographer stopped snapping. Conversations grew clipped. Eyes flicked to phones, then to faces, then back again. I didn't eat. I didn't sip my water. I sat with my hands loosely folded in my lap, watching it unfold like a silent performance. Sienna returned first. Her smile was too wide now, too stiff. She whispered something to one of the bridesmaids, who blinked and looked confused. Then she sat, smoothing her napkin over her lap like control could be restored with posture. Ethan followed minutes later. He didn't sit. He hovered behind his chair, one hand gripping the back of it like it was the only solid thing left. His face had changed. Not just worried, rattled. There was a tightness in his jaw I hadn't seen since he was 12 and lying about sneaking money from my purse. A waiter approached with a refill of champagne. Sienna waved him off with a flick of her fingers. Ethan's phone buzzed again. He checked it, and this time I saw it. Panic. Pure, sharp, unmistakable. He moved toward the bar with fast, purposeful steps. I didn't follow, but I shifted in my chair, angled just enough to see him lean across the counter and whisper something to one of the event coordinators. She frowned, pulled out her own phone, tapped, waited. Whatever he was expecting, he didn't get it. He pulled out his phone again, tapped fast. Sienna joined him seconds later. She didn't even pretend to be calm anymore. Her voice rose, not a yell, but sharper than the music playing in the background. I couldn't make out the words. I didn't need to. One of the groomsmen approached. Ethan snapped something back. The man backed off quickly. Guests had started noticing. Conversation slowed. People glanced around. Some leaned toward each other, whispering behind wine glasses. Others just stared. The illusion was cracking. I stood slowly, not rushed, not dramatic, I stepped away from my table and walked toward the edge of the patio, toward the low stone wall where the sea met the sand. I stood there, arms folded loosely, letting the wind lift my hair. Behind me, I heard movement, quick steps, the dull clatter of a dropped fork, the creak of a chair pushed back too fast. The unraveling had begun. They'd planned every detail of this day. The music, the lighting, the menu printed on thick cardstock with gold trim. But you can't curate damage control in real time. Not when the foundation was always borrowed. Not when the power was never really yours. And not when the silence you dismissed is the one holding the match. From the edge of the patio, I could still see him. Ethan, hands on his hips, suit jacket pushed back, pacing in tight circles near the bar. Sienna beside him, phone pressed to her ear, other hand gesturing wildly. Her calm had shattered. His was slipping fast. It should have hurt, seeing him like that. Seeing my son, the boy I raised, the boy I fed from thrift store groceries and rocked through asthma attacks. Crack in front of a crowd he once worked so hard to impress, but it didn't hurt. It clarified. Because that man in the slate gray suit wasn't the boy I carried through rainstorms in a stroller held together by duct tape. He wasn't the teenager who once called me from his dorm room, crying after his first failed presentation, whispering, "Mom, I don't know if I'm good enough." He wasn't the young man who promised, soft-eyed and grateful, that I'd always have a seat at the table. He was the version of himself that forgot. And maybe that was always going to happen. But I hadn't forgotten, not 1 second. Not the day I pulled him out of a house where yelling lived in the walls, not the night I sat outside his freshman dorm in my car just in case he got too anxious to sleep. Not the birthday I worked a triple shift so he could have the sneakers all the other boys at school had. He had roots, deep ones, made from late nights, unopened envelopes, and a mother who swallowed exhaustion for breakfast. And he'd let them rot for the sake of a narrative. I reached into my clutch and pulled out a folded piece of paper. Not legal, not financial, just a copy of the check I'd written him back then. My handwriting, faded, still legible. For tuition, for your future, with all I have, Mom. I carried it not to guilt him, not to wave it in his face, but as a reminder to myself that I had always given, always without condition, always without applause. But giving doesn't mean forgetting, and silence isn't the same as surrender. Behind me, someone called his name. Another investor, perhaps. A photographer wandered too close and was waved off with a glare. The beautiful illusion was beginning to dissolve under the weight of reality. I watched Ethan straighten his tie. His face had gone cold, resigned. It wasn't just the loss of access. It was the shock of realizing that the story he'd spun didn't belong to him anymore. Because the real foundation wasn't Brooklyn. It wasn't Sienna's branding. It wasn't the celebrity endorsements or sleek interviews. It was me. And roots, when buried long enough, grow strong enough to crack concrete. He found me just after sunset. The last of the daylight was slipping behind the dunes, casting long shadows across the sand. Most of the guests had drifted inside. The music had stopped. All that remained was the hush of waves and the distant clink of glassware being cleared. I stood near the edge of the ceremony arch, the fabric now limp in the cooling wind, petals scattered like someone had dropped beauty and never bothered to pick it back up. Ethan walked up slowly. No theatrics, no raised voice. Just footsteps on damp sand and the weight of everything left unsaid. "Was it you?" he asked. His tone wasn't sharp, just tired. Like he already knew the answer, but still needed to hear it from me. I didn't turn to him right away. I stared at the ocean for a moment longer, then said, "Yes." He exhaled like I'd confirmed something he'd hoped to deny. "You froze everything," he said. I nodded. "You gave me the reason." He didn't speak right away. His shoes sank slightly in the sand, expensive soles never meant for beaches. The silence stretched between us, heavy but clean. "Why today?" he asked finally. I turned to him then, looked at the man he'd become, well-tailored, well-spoken, carefully constructed. He wore the suit from his own line, navy with charcoal piping, sharp shoulders, every seam perfect, and not one stitch of it remembered where it came from. "You chose today," I said. He blinked. "What?" "You and Sienna. You chose to erase me here, to corner me at my own son's wedding and try to buy my silence with a smile and a check." His jaw tensed. He started to speak, but I raised a hand gently. "This isn't revenge," I said. "This is record keeping." He looked away, toward the reception tent. Lights flickered softly inside. People moved like shadows behind the panels. "I never meant to shut you out," he said, quieter now. We needed to keep the story clean for the investors." I nodded once. "So you made it fiction?" He didn't argue. He knew. "You told them you built this from scratch," I said. "But scratch was me. Scratch was diner shifts and janitor nights and the day I gave you that check without asking for anything back but respect." He rubbed the back of his neck, the way he used to when he was nervous before a school recital. "I thought you didn't care about credit," he said. "I don't," I said. "I care about truth." He looked at me then, really looked, not with anger, not even guilt. Just a quiet kind of understanding, the kind that arrives too late. "I wore this today because I thought it would impress you," he said, glancing down at his suit. I smiled, not unkindly. "You wore it because you forgot who helped sew the first button." And then I turned and walked away, not because I was angry, but because I didn't need to be. Inside the reception tent, everything had started to fray. The DJ was talking with someone in a headset, clearly unsure whether to keep playing. The waitstaff moved slower now, casting glances toward the head table where two of the bridesmaids sat alone, their smiles flickering like candlelight in a windstorm. Sienna stood near the edge of the bar, phone in hand, fingers flying over the screen like she was trying to rewrite reality before it could settle. Her voice was low, clipped, biting at someone through the receiver. She hadn't noticed me enter. Not yet. I didn't approach her directly. I stepped toward one of the smaller side tables, removed a slim folder from my clutch, and placed it on the white linen. She turned at the sound, caught my eye, stiffened. "What is that?" she asked, voice thinner than before. Her polish had begun to chip. "Your answer?" I said, tapping the folder once. She came toward it, eyes scanning the gold initials pressed into the front. S.A., the company's monogram. Elegant branding, carefully designed. Shame it had always rested on paper. She never. "Read." She opened it. Her fingers trembled at the edges. Inside were copies of the original partnership agreement. Highlighted in yellow were the clauses Sarah had walked me through. The ones triggered the moment Sienna and Ethan decided to sever my place in their carefully crafted story. Clause 6b. Clause 9. Clause 12. She flipped through, slowly, face tightening with each page. When she reached the signature line, her hand froze. "That's not enforceable," she muttered, though it lacked conviction. "It is," I said. Your legal team can confirm it. The moment you attempted to coerce me to walk away with a payout, the breach was documented, and the original terms came back into effect. She glanced toward Ethan, who had just re-entered the tent. Their eyes met. Something passed between them. Fear, maybe, or the start of blame. I stepped back from the table. I told you I didn't need credit, I said. But you assumed silence meant ownership. It didn't. Sienna opened her mouth, closed it. The folder stayed open, pages curling slightly in the sea air. You thought this business was yours to shape, I continued calmly. But it was never just yours. You built the brand. I funded the bones. The tent was quiet now. More guests were noticing. Some stood with half-full glasses in their hands, unsure whether to stay or drift toward the exits. Sienna looked down at the contract again, then back at me. This will ruin everything, she whispered. I met her eyes. No, I said. This will clarify everything. And that's what they never understood. Silence doesn't erase the fine print. It waits, patiently, until the exact moment it's needed. And then it speaks, clearly, contractually, and without emotion. After the folder was opened, things began to dissolve fast. No one made announcements. There was no dramatic interruption or lights cutting out. But the atmosphere shifted, sharp and irreversible, like the tide had turned, and no one knew whether to wade in or run. I stepped away from the table, leaving the folder behind, untouched except for the weight of its contents. Let them read. Let them grasp the scale of what they triggered with their arrogance. I moved through the tent like a guest who didn't belong, which, in their eyes, I suppose I didn't. The music never resumed. People whispered. Plates went cold. I passed by a photo display near the dessert table. A series of frames lined up carefully on a long wooden plank. Childhood pictures of Ethan. His first birthday. His high school graduation. Him grinning in a too-big blazer, sleeves rolled at the wrists. One of them showed us together. I remembered the day clearly. Ethan had just won a local youth entrepreneurship award for a school project, something about eco-friendly packaging. We were standing on the porch, the certificate in his hands, both of us laughing. They'd placed the photo at the far end of the line, almost cropped from view. It was the only one with me in it. I stared at it for a long moment. That's what this day was supposed to be about. Celebration, legacy, a life that had grown from roots they'd chosen to ignore. But instead, it had become a ledger, a reckoning of debts they didn't think I would ever collect. I didn't hate Ethan, not even then, but I no longer recognized him. He had let Sienna reshape the truth until the lines blurred. Let her style the story so cleanly that he forgot how it began. And somewhere along the way, he traded blood for branding, family for facade. And now he would have to reckon with the cost. Because numbers don't lie. Balance sheets, agreements, signatures, they don't bend to curated narratives. They don't care about hashtags or influencer metrics. They just sit quietly in drawers until someone finally asks the wrong question. And when they do, those numbers answer. Behind me, someone dropped a glass. The sharp crack of it hitting the floor made several heads turn. A waiter rushed to sweep it up, but the silence it left behind felt louder than the shatter. I looked one last time at the photo of me and Ethan, two people who once shared a dream, even if only one of us had the honesty to remember it. Then I turned and walked away from the display, away from the tent, away from the faces that no longer held meaning. Let the numbers speak now. Let the contracts carry the truth. Because the math had always been simple. what's built on silence, must eventually answer to what was never said out loud. I waited until the final dance was called off. No one said it directly. There was no official announcement, no apology from the stage. But the DJ packed up early. The catering staff began clearing half-full wine glasses and untouched dessert plates. Guests drifted into the night in small clusters, murmuring things they wouldn't remember come. Morning. I stayed until most had gone. Not out of triumph, just clarity. When the time felt right, I reached into my bag and pulled out a second envelope, thicker than the first, neatly sealed. I found Ethan standing alone near the edge of the reception space, jacket slung over his shoulder, collar unbuttoned now. The weight of everything hung heavy on him. He saw me and straightened. His face held no anger, only weariness. And something else, regret maybe, or shame too late to do any good. I handed him the envelope. "What is it?" he asked quietly. "Repayment," I said. He stared at it but didn't open it. "You don't have to do this." "I know," I said. Inside was a certified check, every dollar I ever gave him down to the cent, including interest, including the cost of the sewing machine, of the first studio, of the business license I'd helped him file. "I've signed a release," I said. "I'll be removed from the partnership, the board, the books. My stake returns to you, completely." He blinked, caught off guard. "You're stepping away?" "I'm closing the account," I said, voice calm. "Not just the financial one." He looked down at the envelope, then back at me. "Why now?" "Because you don't owe me anything anymore," I said, "and I don't owe you silence." He nodded, slowly, like he understood, like it hurt. "You built something good," I said, "but you built it forgetting the ground it stood on. That's not how foundations work." He didn't speak. He didn't try to argue. The man who once told me he started from scratch now held the receipt in his hands. Signed, sealed, delivered. No room for fiction anymore. I stepped back. "I won't be part of what you do next," I said. "That's yours now. Just make sure you remember what it cost to pretend you got here alone." He looked down again, gripped the envelope tightly. I walked away, leaving him standing in the ruins of his perfect day. Not because I wanted him to hurt, but because sometimes the cleanest justice comes not from taking power, but from returning it. From showing someone the value of what they dismissed, and then letting them carry the weight of it with no one left to blame. I didn't plan on speaking to anyone else that night, not after handing Ethan the envelope, not after walking away from the table that had once been mine in name only. But as I made my way toward the exit path winding through the dunes, a man stepped into my path, older, tanned. Expensive watch half hidden under his rolled cuff. I recognized him from earlier, Sienna's father. He'd made a toast during cocktail hour, all booming pride and awkward metaphors about legacy. Now, he looked like someone trying to piece together a puzzle that no longer matched the picture on the box. "Can I ask you something?" he said. I stopped, nodded once. "What just happened?" he asked. "Why today?" He wasn't angry, just unsettled, like a man who thought he understood the deal he signed, but hadn't read all the pages. I held his gaze. Because today, they expected power. He tilted his head. And I wanted them to feel absence. He didn't respond right away, just studied me like he was seeing something different now. Not the woman he had likely written off as a quiet mother in a modest dress, but something else, something heavier. "I thought you were just here for the show," he said after a moment. "Didn't realize you helped build the stage." I offered a faint smile. That's the thing about quiet people. We're not always part of the show, but we remember the blueprints. He laughed under his breath, not mocking, more like surrender. Fair enough, he said. They'll have to figure out how to clean this up. They will, I replied, or they won't. He looked over his shoulder toward the flickering lights of the reception tent. The music hadn't returned. The guests were thinning by the minute. I suppose you've made your point, he said. No, I corrected gently. I didn't come to make a point. I came to draw a line. He nodded once, slowly, like he finally understood. Then I hope they learn from it, he said. I didn't respond, because whether they learned or not wasn't mine to manage anymore. I stepped past him, the sand cool beneath my shoes, the sky now fully dark. The breeze carried salt and the faint scent of extinguished candles. Behind me, the remnants of a perfect day unraveled without fireworks, without shouting, without spectacle. It wasn't revenge that lingered in the air. It was clarity. And sometimes, clarity is the most disruptive guest of all. The kind that arrives without warning, doesn't need a seat, and never waits for an invitation. The beach was empty the next morning. The sun rose pale and slow, casting a soft glow across the damp sand. The tide had taken everything: footprints, petals, echoes of laughter, leaving behind only the steady pulse of the sea. I walked barefoot, letting the water curl around my ankles. The cold bit in a way that woke something deep inside me. The chill was honest. It didn't hide behind silk dresses or polished smiles. I thought about everything I'd built quietly. Not just the business, but the life I carved from hardship. The sacrifices no one saw. The nights alone counting pennies. The fear held tight in my chest. The hope I tucked inside a worn envelope. I thought about Ethan too. The son I raised on love and grit, now wrapped up in suits and stories that didn't include me. The boy who once told me, "You make everything safe." Now a man who believed safety was something you earned alone. The waves whispered truths no one else wanted to hear. What remains after everything is stripped away isn't always what we expect. Not jewels or trophies. Not applause or recognition. It's the quiet knowledge that you stood, that you fought, that you remembered. I pulled my coat tighter and looked out over the horizon. The sky was beginning to bleed pink, promise on the edge of dawn. Somewhere beneath the surface, the tide was turning. I thought about the sandcastles built today. Beautiful, intricate, temporary. They gleamed in the sun, but I knew the sea wouldn't wait. It never does. I'd spent years building something stronger, foundations forged in struggle, held together by truth and patience. That kind of strength doesn't need noise. It doesn't need witnesses. It only needs time and faith. I took a deep breath and let the salt air fill my lungs. There was no bitterness left in me, no anger burning like a fire, just the steady calm of someone who knows what's theirs, what I gave, what I reclaimed, and what I will never let go. Because in the end, what remains isn't just what we lose. It's what we refuse to surrender. Back home, the house was quiet, the kind of quiet that holds its breath after a storm. I closed the front door behind me and leaned against it for a moment, letting the weight of the day settle into my bones. I placed the folder, the one filled with contracts, emails, bank statements, and carefully highlighted agreements, on the dining table. It wasn't a trophy or a weapon. It was a record, a ledger of truth written in ink and patience. I pulled out a new notebook from the shelf. Blank pages, waiting. Pages that didn't carry the weight of the past, but the promise of what's next. I sat down and made a cup of tea. The steam curled around me like a quiet invitation. I took the first sip and felt the warmth spread slowly, steady. There was a soft ping from my phone, a banking alert, a routine balance update. I didn't check it because the account was closed, the case was finished, and the chapter had been written in full. I thought about the woman I was before all this started, the one who lived in fear, who tiptoed around broken promises and half-truths, the woman who believed silence meant safety. She wasn't gone. She was just waiting for the moment to build something real, something lasting. I placed the notebook beside the folder and looked out the window. The ocean was calm tonight. The moonlight traced silver paths across the waves. Sandcastles don't last, but foundations do. I smiled, not because I had won or lost, but because I had chosen to stand, to act, to protect what mattered most, to be the quiet force that shifts tides. And now, with the past settled and the future unwritten, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. Sandcastle time was over. The real work had just begun.